All right, welcome everyone. My name is Carson Carson. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute. And we're so happy that you are all joining us here today for the next hour in our panel series event that is in part supported by the Resource Nexus for Sustainability Grand Challenge project at Boise State. And I'm really excited to have this conversation about the role art plays in building sustainable futures. We've had various topics throughout this academic year that have related to different things under this umbrella of sustainability. And I'm really excited for this conversation about how art plays into that. Before we jump into that, I always like to define a few things and give the context for why we're doing these panels. So the goals of these panels are really to connect across disciplines and sectors, to learn about what are some of the ongoing projects and organizations in our community that we may not know about, find out how university researchers and students can better support some of the local efforts that are happening and what kinds of information needs there are, and then consider what actions we can take moving forward. I also like to define the term community resilience because as the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute, we're thinking about this a lot. We define this as the capacity of a community or region to adapt to change and thrive despite the chronic stresses and acute shocks they may experience. And of course, resilience ties into sustainability, which we also define as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And here we have the 17 and something art-based in here, and I didn't see anything specific, but I think art really applies across all of these different goals. And so I'm excited to hear what our panelists have to say about the role art plays in sustainability. I am really pleased to be joined here by Rulon Wood, or Rue Wood, who's going to be co-facilitating the facilitated questions part of the panel. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Rue in just a moment. I do want to say we're going to have about 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So if you want to go ahead throughout and put your questions in the chat, feel free to do that, or you can wait until that 15 minutes and I will take over then. So take it away, Rue.
Okay, cool. Well, it's so nice to see everybody. We're going to start with introduction. Oops, I got to let a couple more people in.
I got it.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I'm going to introduce our panelists. So I know all three of these panelists, and they are super smart, interesting, fun people. So I'm going to start by just, you can see their title here. I'm going to ask them to say a few things about themselves before we get rolling. And then I have about 10 questions, which is probably too many questions, but we'll see how we can get through all these. So can we just go in the order of the folks on the screen? Jen, can you introduce yourself? And then we'll go to Tilly, and then we'll go to Amanda.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us and inviting me to be part of this. I'm I'm Jennifer Stevens, and I am the Director of Arts and History for the City of Boise, which is a relatively new role for me. Probably a lot of you know me either as a historical consultant in the community or perhaps as a professor at Boise State. Both roles I've had in the past for many years. And so I'm new to this role, but really just applying a lot of the work I've done in the past to sort of a new position. So I'm excited to be part of this, and thanks for including me. And it's so fun to see so many people I know from so many different parts of my life.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Jen. Tilly?
Hi, my name is Matilda or Tilly Bubb, formerly Karen. I am the cultural planner for the city of Boise, and prior to that, I was the public art manager for 20 years. So I come to it with that experience. I'm also a visual artist and a PhD candidate in public management and policy with a focus on creative economy. And I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Amanda.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you all. So my name is Amanda Ashley. I'll first say that my PhD is in urban planning, and I study economic and community development, but I study that through the lens of arts and culture and placemaking. And so my original home at Boise State is in the School of Public Service, but I recently took on the role as the director of the School of the Arts, which is in the College of Arts and Sciences in August. And so I kind of like straddle both of those areas. And the School of the Arts consists of art, design, and visual studies. music and theater, film, and creative writing with some of the most talented faculty, staff, and students that I've ever had the privilege of getting to work with. And then we also have some other, the Blue Galleries is part of that, which is like a student-run gallery done by and curated with Kirsten Furlong, who's truly outstanding. And many of you know who she is. And then also we have the Luminary, which is a digital touch museum, which is excellent. And if you haven't been there, you need to come and check it out. And I'll talk a little bit more about its connection to sustainability later on.
Very cool. Thanks so much. Well, we sure appreciate all three of you taking part in this. So let me tell you kind of how I envision running the panel here. So I'm going to start with a single question and we'll open it up to the panel. And I'm hoping our panel can kind of talk to each other because they'll have a very interesting conversation amongst the three of them. So I'm going to start with the first question. Oh, and I want to make it clear, all of the questions have to do with art and history, so you can take it in any direction you want to go with this, okay? So here's the first question, and this is a pretty simple one. What does research look like in your area of study? And can you tell us about one project related to art or history that you're really excited about at this current moment? And let's start with Tilly, yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in for that. I am, I've had the privilege of working on two public art plans in the last few years. The Public Works Public Art Plan was completed in 2020, and that's probably the most relevant for this conversation. It really focused squarely on the role of art to interact with climate change issues, environmental issues. We outlined in that plan a number of different opportunities for artists to really explore, kind of setting the table for artists to explore these types of issues. So I'm excited for that plan to roll out. So that's in my life as a cultural planner. The type of opportunities that I get to scope for future artists to do is part of what I'm excited about. And then in my scholarly life, I'm working with Dr. Ashley on a book and two other professors on a book focusing on creative economy. So for that, it's really looking at other cities and what are other cities doing? What kind of models are they exhibiting? And what kind of policies might we bring back to Boise? So those are some examples of what I'm doing.
Very nice. Yeah.
I can go next, or Amanda, do you want to go next?
I love listening to both of you, so you go ahead, Jen.
So one of my academic field is urban environmental history. And so something that I've been working on for the last several years is a study of Boise's urban identity specifically. And I've got an essay coming out in a book, and hopefully in the next year or so, on urban rivers throughout the West. And what's exciting about what I'm doing now in this position is I've been asked by Amanda's team and also Emily Wakefield in the School of the Environment to take that research and present it in the Luminary. So I'm getting to use photography and I'm working with the city archivist and I'll probably also go to the state archives and also to the Boise State Special Collections to collect photographs that we can put up and possibly other types of artwork that we can put up in the Luminary that goes along with this research that I'm doing that traces the history of Boise's identity from what I call from blue to green. So this idea that our community has really was an industrial community because of its isolation. We had a lot more industry here than people recognize, but of course, starting in the 60s and 70s, we really started transitioning toward this information economy with Micron and HP being a significant part of our landscape here, our economic landscape. We really started drawing sort of a new community to live here in the valley, and the things that they demanded were very much recreational in nature. So I'll be looking at telling that story through photography at the Luminary in April as part of the Society for Environmental Journalists. They're coming in for a conference, and of course the Cecil Andrus Center is having their conference that month too. So that's a project I'm working on right now that really I'm going to be able to use that visual art, the photography, and maybe some other depictions, other sorts of artistic formats to take to the Luminary and present that research. So I'm excited about that.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too, Jen. And so the other thing I'm just going to quickly talk about another event that we have coming up at the Luminary on February 23rd that's connected to this is something called A River Out of Time, which is part of the Powell 150, what would you call it, anniversary of John Wesley Powell's Colorado River exploration, and a variety of different types of academic disciplines and artists came together to recreate that journey as best as possible, to be able to talk about what are the challenges we face from environment and sustainability. And so we're going to be showing that screening, bringing some of the people that were involved in it to campus, and also featuring a variety of our other faculty across the university as well. And so I'll be sure to put that in the chat once I figure out how to do that with a PDF. So you'll have to bear with me on that piece. The things that I think maybe I'll add to kind of maybe broaden out some other areas in addition to the Luminary is right now I'm teaching a class called Environmental Studies 300, which is management and analysis. And the students are actually working with the Garden City Placemaking Fund in Searles District, which is a really interesting site for sustainability, and to think about it from the lens of arts, culture, and placemaking. And so the students are exploring a couple of different options about how to help this kind of grassroots nonprofit, community-run kind of organization to help them think about that kind of intersection between those two in terms of developing a map for the area, developing a pocket park, and also how to help get developers in a place that's kind of like the Wild West, how to help them think a little bit more strategically about how to integrate and incorporate art and artists into different development projects when you don't necessarily have the same kind of incentives to do so as you might in other places as well. I'll also just chime in there too. I'm also working with the Idaho Commission on the Arts to develop like a creative placemaking certificate where sustainability is another prime example of helping people understand the power of arts to be able to be the frame for talking about, for being able to talk about the issues I know so many people on this call care about.
Cool, very cool. Thank you so much. Okay, so this next question, this one is going to feel like it's going to feel very reductive, but I want you to think about tell us. So I'm going to pose the question like somebody off the street, and I want you to see how you would answer this. So when we think about sustainability, a lot of people, when they think about art and they think about, well, I should say when they think about art and they think about history and public works, they think, well, art pieces, like public art pieces, they enrich our lives, they're beautiful. And when they think about history, sometimes they think about, yeah, I go to a historical site and it's a lovely story and I'd like to hear about the past. But I would be interested in knowing how all of you think about how art and history can go beyond that and help us create a sustainable future in whatever capacity you can think of. So whether it's like creating dialogue, I mean, some of these projects you've talked about already kind of answer it, but you can take that any way you want.
Sure, I'll start. I think you started to get at it right away. I think the, in fact, Rue, I like what you just said right there. I think that the challenge is when people think that there's only one way that art history and placemaking can contribute to that conversation. So like a singular public art piece, when in reality, there's a variety of different types of tools and strategies and approaches to do that. And how you bring artists as part of that conversation rather than bringing them on at the end, I think is, and also the same thing with historians too. And, you know, like a lot of my research focuses on how we make arts and culture an anchor rather than just an amenity. And so helping people understand that this is that particular group, that particular perspective should be at the table from the outset and being able to talk about these topics.
Yeah, I'll weigh in unless Tilly has, okay. So I just wanted to, I think that what Amanda just said is spot on. And as I was sort of thinking about how arts and history relate to sustainability, there were a couple things that occurred to me. I mean, I think that what art and history can do, or the humanities generally, is allow things that are more traditionally presented. Like if you think about data, for instance, right? Numbers and charts and that sort of thing, it typically speaks to a particular audience, right? So there'll be people, from kindergarten all the way to higher ed, where they'll say, I'm bad at math, right? But if you bring a historian in to understand climate, for instance, and you can tell a narrative about climate, it will speak to a different audience that might otherwise turn away and feel that that subject's not for them. The same is true for art, right? You can have a piece of art that will inspire dialogue and bring a new audience in to discuss these things that feel maybe out of reach or not understandable to an audience that that would maybe now be brought into the conversation. So I think that the humanities offer that that widening, that broadening of audience, that to new subjects or to traditionally hard to grasp subjects that some people just turn away from naturally.
And what I'll add is, I think there's two different ways of thinking about this. One is the process and one is the product. The process actually creates a lot of opportunities, and not all artists work in a way that engages community in process, but those that do create an opportunity for public to actually be involved in the design process, or to be involved in asking the questions. So the artist is reflecting back in some aspect of what they're hearing from community through that engagement. And then in the product, the artist can create different messages based on the types of materials they use. They may not be traditional materials. It's in the places that they choose to put that work, which may not be where an architect or an engineer might locate that artwork. And then it's who they really orient that work to. So that artists are innovators. They're thinking about things in different ways. That's part of what their job is. And so they bring to the table a different sensibility that can speak to people in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would, also kind of chime in there too, that there are also lots of people that may not consider themselves as artists, but use creative work and use creative frameworks to be able to participate in those conversations. And how do we create the spaces for that to happen? Which is something I think a lot about, like from the school of the director position, about how do we make that possible, that people feel welcome to be a part of that creative process as well, regardless of what their degree looks like.
Yeah, that's really good. Very good. Cool.
And can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I think that, I'll go back to, I'll sort of add on to what I was saying earlier about data, for instance. And I think, data can kind of can come and go, right? It can become outdated really quickly. But if you add sort of a historical angle or you add a piece of art, you suddenly have a timelessness to that conversation that goes beyond just whatever that data is. And so I think that is another way that the humanities, arts and history in particular, can really ground conversations and also, again, broaden conversations in a way that they couldn't without those disciplines.
Jen, I think that's so crazy important. My students were talking about that the other day when they were going through the Garden City placemaking mapping idea, right? That it's not just to acknowledge what is currently there, but what was there and how does that shape who we are today or how we think about space or who that space is for. And I know I sit on a number of other kind of public art panels, and those are some of the themes that come up over and over again. And for me, when I think about sustainability and resilience, those things go hand in hand, for sure.
Yeah. I just want to provide one concrete example, which is the public art that's at Boise Watershed, which is our climate awareness center. The artists created artworks that are there, but those artworks live on in different ways. Cindy Bush is our educator at that location, and she brings her expertise, and her teachers bring their expertise, so that when students experience those public art pieces, they experience it in a different light because of what those other professionals can bring to that artwork. So the artwork is not a static thing. It really is something that's alive, that is amplified by the voices of the educators and scientists that encounter that work and build off of that work.
And I think that's a really that the Watershed is such a concrete example. And we have a variety of other ones too that maybe stretch how people think about the relationship between art, culture, history, and sustainability or resilience, like all of the things, right? Like there's the Watershed, which is like one of my favorite places to go for those reasons. But there's also like the Boise Art Museum. There's the Idaho Shakespeare Festival. There's the Irma Hayman House that has that in different kinds of ways. There's the Anne Frank, Human Rights Memorial. There's all these other different kind of places that represent different elements of sustainability, particularly based not only on their location, but on their history, the evolution, the kind of programming that happens in those spaces. And so like I teach a class, like a 3-credit 1-week class in the spring that's about community development and sustainability through all of those different types of arts environments. And it brings together students in environmental studies, but also in the different art departments that I mentioned before. It brings together people from, political science, from history, right? That all come with those different kinds of frames that are able to like understand the challenges that those places are trying to address. And I think that like, in my mind, that's kind of like where one way of thinking about interdisciplinary and transformative research, scholarship, and teaching happens when you're bringing in those different types of perspectives with those concrete examples.
That's
All right, so of course I have to weigh in. Rue, sorry, you're gonna get.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I think what's also, and again, I'll go back to the Watershed. And for any of you on the call who haven't been there, I strongly recommend you go out there. The smell can be a bit much, Steve, sorry, but but it's totally worth it because the art's amazing. And I think what's really particularly tangible, literally, at the Watershed is, again, the accessibility that art brings to questions of science. And in that particular case, there are things there that are meant to drive anyway, children to touch and feel things and understand processes regarding water and how the water cycle works. And just ways for children to sort of approach topics that are way above their head, right? But which make them ask questions, and art can really do that. And I think if we think about sustainability as more than simply environmental in nature, but really sort of, I'm thinking of it in this sense of the inquiry that art provokes from a small, young age all the way through the end of a person's life. And I think, sustaining that inquiry-based mindset with art from the beginning is a really important part of sustainability. And I think the Watershed and what we've done at the Watershed, what the city's done at the Watershed, it is a great example of how to get that young generation in from the very beginning to provoke that sort of thinking and questioning all the time.
Can I add on something to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, you should have got 3 people who didn't know each other's work at all.
Seriously.
But that's like why I think the leadership that Public Works has provided in so many of these different ways, like I'm beyond grateful for them. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks everybody over there, because they get the power of art as translation of ideas, right? To like what Jen was saying, but like the other thing that's incredibly rare that the city of Boise has, that very few other cities or counties have in the US, is a cultural planner, right? Like that is a position that is designed, and that's Tilly, to be able to think across the kinds of silos that don't just exist in academia, but also like that exist in the ways that cities are structured and organized. And in my mind, like that position is magnificent for those reasons, because I'm not sure, it's very difficult to do that without those kinds of structures in place. So good job, Tilly. Good job, Public Works.
Yeah. So just hearing everybody talk, and when I think about my own youth, like all the places that I visited like that when I was a kid, they almost feel like sacred places to me. Like they're so cool. So here's the question. What about the folks that don't go to those places? Do you have any ideas on how we create even more of a sense of community and get folks who normally aren't involved in those locations to go and check them out?
Well, I'll say that you're right. The Watershed is a destination. You don't just come across it. But I think what we're going to find, I hope, in the city is, just to kind of give everybody a little bit of background here, Tilly put together, and the city council has adopted the Public Works master arts plan. And we will be hiring literally in the next month a person to implement that plan. And so what I'm hoping we see over the next 10 years or so is art in places where more people are just naturally. So Steve and I have talked about, obviously the Greenbelt, we have an immense amount of people of the residents in the city that traverse various parts of the Greenbelt, where we have water facilities, water renewal facilities, et cetera, where we can provide some of that education and some of that artwork. Tilly is deeply familiar with that plan because she wrote it, and Steve is as well. So I welcome both their comments, but I think that identifying places where people simply are, as opposed to destinations they have to go to, is part of the answer to that question.
I might chime in a little bit, and like Amy's got a great comment in the box too, that she's like, why not go to where the people are? And I think this comes back to like an earlier comment I made, that it shouldn't just be in one place. It's not just one strategy, that there are an interweavedness that happens in terms of like how we have to think about the myriad of places where this kind of work should be happening. And so the School of the Arts is about to do a working group on how we think about some of these topics, and in connection to community engagement and how the schools can kind of play that front door kind of that position. And also to Amy's point, when I looked at my class evaluations, which we all know how much fun that is at the end of the semester. And the comments from the students were very much like, why did I have to go all the way out to the Watershed? And, and my smart comment back was, because it's amazing, right? And they all recognize the amazingness, but they also desperately wanted to be able to see those things in other locations too. And so, I'm not sure I have any answers there yet, other than I think Amy's right. I think Jen is absolutely right. And trying to think through how to do a better job of being able to articulate that. And, and I think about that from a university perspective of all of the artists here, all of the students, all of the projects that everybody else is doing on campus, and how to make that more visible. And Fonda Pertelis, I think, is on the call, and she's like the university arts curator, and like she's leading a group of people right now to like think about a campus map, and like to think about it from more of a thematic area other than just like what is here, right? But like, what is the great kind of creative work that's happening? What are the different types of events that are going on in those areas, and ...
Yeah, and I think the public art example that's a great model for this is the traffic box art wraps. That program's been going on for about 10 years. And what that program has done is it's put art in an unexpected place on these boxes, and it's spread that across the city. So that's both given artists a voice, particularly emerging artists who have never done public art before. It's given, we have over 236 is our current count of boxes. So it's given over 200 artists an opportunity to make art for a public place. And then it's given individuals who never necessarily thought about going to the art museum, for example. When I meet people and I say that I was associated with the public art program, the first thing they say, hands down, is, I love the boxes. Do you have anything to do with those traffic boxes? And so I feel like there's people who don't necessarily self-identify as artists or kids, they see that and they start to recognize a pattern. And I had this one mother who told me that every box that's not wrapped, her little boy points it out and says, why isn't there art there, mommy?
I want to come back to like, there's a comment from Greg in the box about like, not just like, why not about the environmental art? And I remember when Tilly was doing the cultural planning focus groups. How long ago was that, Tilly? Like
in 2017.
2017. Yeah. Wow. Both a long time ago and not very long ago. And like, you would have these conversations with these focus groups, and they keep saying like, what does art and culture mean to you? And, the first thing each member that would come to this group from all walks of life, it would be the foothills, right? And it's a different way of thinking about that, right? And like, what's the role of the Foothills Learning Center in that relationship with how we think about eco art and environmental art? I would also say that it's, in addition to just thinking about the end product that like Tilly is mentioning, it's also thinking about the doers of that kind of work. And we have a lot of people like in the community. So I think about Tree Fort is like a wonderful example. of an organization that has that B Corp model, right? That is driven by art and music, but is also driven to like really grapple with how they think about sustainability and trying to champion that as part of their institutional, the structure of the way that they operate and run. And so I also think it's also being able to highlight those examples too of the organizations themselves, and maybe some new methods for how they are trying to address some of those challenges.
Yeah, and I'll comment on the comment regarding nature and the role of nature as art. In working with our Parks Department, we've actually made a conscious choice to not put art in the foothills. And that was specifically because this is open space and we want people to experience nature as open space. But we have put art at Foothills Learning Center, and we have had discussions about putting art at trailheads, both to mark that entry point and to bring another point of view or highlight those entry points, but to not interfere with people's experience of nature, because so much of our environment is mediated in an urban place. So we are thinking about those things as well.
Nice, very cool. All right, so the next question is also about sustainability, but what I'm interested in is, so far we've talked about how artists and historians are trying to create a more sustainable future, but how do we sustain the artists and the historians, either through programs or funding or whatever? Anyone want to start?
I'll start with that.
Okay.
We have been undergoing a process here at the city that some of you may have heard of. Maybe many of you on the call know who Tim Peen is. He's our new planning development director, he's not that new anymore, I think maybe a year and a half, but in any event, he's undergoing project right now he's calling Design of Boise, which is a really sort of this all-encompassing effort to sort of step back away from the zoning code and sort of look at a much bigger picture of what should Boise look like. And he's looking kind of at how Boise became what Boise is today in terms of the actual shape of it and who lives where and that sort of thing. But in a situation like that, I think in the past, a project along those lines wouldn't necessarily have brought, frankly, either historians in or an artist in. And one of the things that he has decided he wants to do, and this came from his experience in Atlanta, where he ran a similar process. In Atlanta, he brought an artist in, and the artist created this beautiful poster that became sort of this. It encapsulated everything in an artist kind of way that had gone on during the process. It sort of represented procedurally what had happened during the process, but it became sort of this iconic poster that everybody in Atlanta wanted. And so when he came here and he's embarked on this process at the city of Boise, he said the same thing. He's like, it doesn't have to be a poster. In fact, it shouldn't be a poster. It should be something else. He brought our arts team in right off the bat. So I think that part of, and this goes back to the comment I was making earlier, I think part of what we need to train our engineers, our mathematicians, our data cruncher people to do is to think about how the humanities, and in this case, arts and history, can enhance their product and reach audiences that it may not otherwise bring in. And I think that is a really important way of sustaining the doers that you're talking about, right? And I think that having myself come from a practicing history background before I came to this job, that's kind of what I was always trying to get in planners' minds and lawyers' minds was there are so many places you can use history and where history can enhance your output. Use me, and that's how we really have to do it, is we have to train these other disciplines to think about the ways that these other disciplines, history, art, English, other sort of humanitarian or humanities type disciplines can enhance their products.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I would like to challenge everyone on the call to really think about what kind of resources and skills they bring to the table, and to encourage them to look at what's missing in our creative environment and what can they do to help fill that void. For myself, outside of my day jobs, I helped to co-found Cyril's Place, which is an artist in residence program. Prior to that, we did not have a national artist in residence program in Boise. I also worked with Ken Howell, who's a funder to fund the Alexa Rose Foundation, which gives grants to artists. So those are two examples. I'm happily no longer on the board of either of those. So this is not a conflict of interest to bring them up, but but that's part of it. I helped to found these organizations, and now other people are managing them. So that's sustainability. That's creating organizations that others get involved in, that help to create places for artists to show, places for artists to be creative and to meet other artists. So I would challenge people to think about. I think the placemaking fund is something that again came out of a need to work with artists to create murals. To make sure that city, that garden city, maintained a creative ethos in the face of so much development. So for each of us, is identifying what is it that we want to see that isn't here, and how can we use our time and our energy and our networks to build something. That's one of the things I love about Boise, is that we can still have a huge impact on this community by being on boards, by being a volunteer, by providing your insights to organizations like that.
I would also just say that as the director of the School of the Arts, I would be thrilled to meet with each and every one of you to talk about your ideas and your interests, and how you might see some of those connections, or what you would like to see being nurtured in a different way. In fact, that's like one of the best parts of this new job I have. So that would be wonderful. The other thing that I'm be interested to see is that the College of Arts and Sciences right now is undergoing something called an innovation grant project to think about how to position the college in a more thoughtful way, given all of the pressing challenges that we face both as a society, but also as a university. And there were a number of proposals that did focus, if you think broadly about sustainability, the ways that art and creative activity can be able to address that. And so I think that there are funding resources to make that happen at our college level. And I'm doing something as well similar to at the School of the Arts, and a lot of the interest I get, requests that I get from faculty, is to try to support that kind of work that they already do, to make it easier to do, to create more resources, and also to think about how to build bridges to other kinds of relationships on campus and in the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll add one other thing. I mean, I think Tilly pointed out the importance of serving on boards and granting to individual artists. But one of the things that I think Tilly has been instrumental in building at the city is sort of building capacity. So running workshops, for instance, like the city's actually got one coming up where we're facilitating a workshop where we're going to help artists learn how to apply for grants, right? So not just giving grants, which of course the city does as well, but actually helping teach them, because oftentimes what you find in the artist community is, and this is true in the history community too, I started out I didn't intend to run a business, and I certainly had no training in running a business because I was trained in how to be a historian, right? So same thing with artists. Artists don't know how to apply for grants. They aren't trained for that in graduate school. Maybe under Amanda's incredible leadership, they will be trained when they come out now. Maybe, I don't know if that's something she's got on her plate, but the city of Boise recognizes that that's an important skill to sort of offer and to help artists learn as they're making their way into the world of trying to do art for a living, right? As opposed to, just as a hobby. And I think that's an important way to build sustainability for doers as well.
I would also just add that I just got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to study arts and cultural districts, and in 4 different cities, and we have like 3 other university partners in other cities. And one of the ways that we're trying to grapple with the sustainability question is also to think about it from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective. And so obviously focusing on the environment side for sure, but how do we think about that from an equity perspective? And I'm connecting this to your question, Rue, by saying that it is not just saying that those things are important, but what are the actual program resource programs, ways to actually support that kind of work to be able to do so. And so we're developing a national database of these arts and cultural districts to be able to assess that kind of work that will be shared publicly, so people will have access to that information. So part of it in my area is just even understanding what the scope of that work is, and how to share that information. So people then might be able to do other kinds of research projects that are connected, and to build a community of conversation around what are the varied ways that we do think about sustainability and all aspects of sustainability in relationship to art and culture.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
A big one I want to throw out there that I don't know what the solution is yet, that a lot of my friends are facing, is housing, costs of space. So housing, space to rehearse, space to have studios. As our land and real estate prices go up, it's pushing artists further and further out to the margins, or they're leaving Boise. And so that's actually something that I'm very nervous about in terms of our city's future of sustaining the livelihood of artists, because a lot of times they're working in the gig economy and kind of piecing together things where they can't afford to live here anymore.
I think there's that. The other, can I add on two other very quick things? I swear, Rue, it'll be fast. One, Kendra commented in the box, in case people aren't looking at it, that like Mariana DeGraff is doing like really great work as the associate dean right now in COAS, and like really is trying to create bridges and not thinking just about particular disciplinary perspectives. And she is absolutely and utterly excellent. The other person that's on the call today is like Nicole Malumbi, who like in her work and doing these kind of master level, like interdisciplinary programs, is that, you know, Nicole gets a lot of people that are interested in this kind of work where there aren't necessarily specific graduate programs that can do that. And so trying to be able to like have somebody like Nicole in that position that can look across the university to help students have access to the courses that they might need, that they are working with Nicole to develop these individualized degree plans so that they can tackle how we think about this topic from a sustainability perspective is like, so I think so key and so central. So thanks to Nicole and to Mariana.
And wow, I wish we could talk about some of those projects. Oh man, those interdisciplinary projects are so interesting. I got to ask Carson. Carson, how much time do we have before we open it up to questions?
Maybe let's do like one more question. We're trying to get about 15 minutes at the end for.
Okay, I got a fast one.
Rue, did we make it through at least two of the questions?
Yeah, we got to the first two. Okay, here's a question for all of you, because I know you've all been involved in this stuff. And this is totally a selfish one because I like new technology. So my question is, what kind of how is access to new digital technology changing what you do? So we got the Luminary. I took a cool walking tour with Tilly and she showed me some really interesting projects. I know Jen was on a podcast thesis project. So I want to hear, you don't have to talk about those, but how you think new technologies are changing the way we do this stuff. Either in the production or the product. I mean, the process or the product.
I'm a Luddite. Can I opt out of this question?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
I think we're gonna be able to do well. I'm hoping, and it's not really new technology so much as it's after COVID, people are into this again, so let's deploy it, and that is QR codes. So we're actually talking about on the old Boise blocks, and I shouldn't say talking about. We're doing on the old Boise blocks. We're going to be doing some signage that is going to allow people to do some historical self-guided walking down and around those blocks. And of course, there's actually going to be two big public art installations between 3rd and 6th on Grove in the next year and a half, along with some very important historical interpretive signage that's going to go on there. So we're using QR codes to enhance that, so that, you know, you don't have to use the QR codes if you don't want to, but it will be an enhancement for those people who, you know, are carrying their phones and want to sort of get additional information. So I think that, along with hopefully doing some public tours, self-guided on people's phones for public art, as well as historical places throughout the city. I think that those are some low-hanging fruit, because again, the technology is not brand new, but it's actually kind of come back after being out of fashion before COVID. I think now everybody looks at their menus on their phone, which for the record, I'm really opposed to, but I think that QR codes can be really helpful for bringing art sort of and history to the forefront to the average person walking around town.
Very cool. Thanks.
I don't think I have something all that insightful to say here, just that like the fact that I am grappling with that and thinking about that at like 3 o'clock in the morning a lot of the time. And Rue, and you and I have been talking quite a bit about that as well. I think I'll give two very small examples. I think, or the one big example is the luminary, but like with the luminary, what we haven't talked about yet is that my hope that we can make this into a more of a decision-making theater, right? That technology that luminary allows us to do is to bring people in from the community, to bring people in, for example, like Jen and I have talked a great deal about this, to like be able to tackle some of the pressing problems that we have with sustainability and with resilience, and use the luminary to be able to facilitate those conversations. So for me, that's like where a significant portion of my kind of intellectual work is going right now, to try to figure out how to do that in really easy kinds of ways, or maybe not easy, but less difficult kinds of ways. I will also say in that class I mentioned that's working with the Garden City Placemaking Fund is that we have students that are working on digital mapping. And the digital mapping piece is one that comes back to a question of like citizen mapping to me in some way. Like it's one thing to like design a map that's an ArcGIS that only certain people can be able to access it. But what are the mapping softwares where everybody can contribute? And how do we think about a more democratic, inclusive, accessible way of being able to pull that off? And so that's like one area that my class is exploring now. And as much as I think technology has become far more easy to activate, it's still inaccessible for lots of people for lots of different reasons. And so I think that that's like a deeply important part of this conversation as well.
Nice. Very good. Cool.
Yeah, and I would just add that the mapping is something that GIS mapping is something that I use in working with our GIS team at the city. I would like to be more facile at it myself, but I think it really helps to provide that big picture to really understand the geographic dispersion of our artworks, for example, and to understand where art is and where it is not. And that also comes back to the equity questions about where do we need to think about investing that we haven't invested before. So mapping really helps to understand those in a more visceral way.
And just to,
wait,
go.
I will just say Tilly has actually just recently done a really important analysis of exactly that, and be on the lookout for some new initiatives out of our department that hopefully will come in the years ahead to rectify some of those gaps.
Very cool.
I'm not going to add on because I don't want Carson to be mad at me. So I'm gonna...
Well, okay, so we're going to open it up to questions, but I just want to say thank you so much to the three of you. Just fascinating stuff. Great work. The most important work, in my opinion, going on right now. So keep it up. And Carson's going to facilitate the questions.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we could talk about this for like 2 more hours. So I don't think there's been a ton of questions that haven't been answered in the chat, but I did, some people submitted questions in their registration. So I wanted to pull out some of those, and then folks who are here, if you have some questions, feel free to add those now to the chat. So one of them that came up was, how can we encourage art and navigate the fear of censorship here in Idaho, as we're talking about these issues that are potentially going to be censored, or there's fear of that. So whoever wants to take that one.
You know, I'll take that one. I think in some ways it really depends on who is who's creating the work. I mean, as a government agency, everything is political. And so we do have to think about not torpedoing our program by doing something that's going to get blowback in a way that's going to destroy the good work that we've done. That's not to say that we censor ourselves, but we do have to be aware of our political climate. But if you're working with a nonprofit, those risks are different. Or if you're doing something as an individual, or you're doing something in Freak Alley, those risks are different. So I think part of it depends on kind of where you sit, who's funding that work, and what it is you're talking about.
Thank you, Tilly. Does anyone want to add on to that?
I might just say that, like, I think about, I think I saw Sue Lotto, who runs the Arts Entrepreneurship program here at Boise State, on the call. Like, part of it is like also training people that want to work in the public sphere on these kinds of issues, about how some of these positions are very political, right? And so how do you help people that are in those roles have the skill set to be able to navigate that? And I would say it's not just skills, but also like balancing your well-being as well as you're going through what I think is pretty upsetting times and turbulent times, particularly about how municipal and other government workers can be treated.
Yeah.
I also, if it's possible, I want to encourage the potential for participants to speak up. We have some really wonderful people on the call who are involved in this work as well.
Yeah, does anyone in the audience want to chime in, or? All right, well, if you do, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. I was just seeing a note from Kendra in the chat about collaborating across, STEM fields and art fields. And I guess as someone who is from more of the geosciences side of things, if there are students or professors who, are creating a proposal and they want to include artists or art in that proposal, maybe, I don't know if the National Science Foundation typically does that. Maybe you have to come at it from multiple funding sources, but I guess I'd be curious to hear, what are like the first steps if you're someone who really wants to bring more art into the science world? How do you do that? Rue, do you want to, I see you.
So I feel really strongly about this one, because it feels like to me, because I love being on teams with folks in the sciences, but often it feels as though the art folks are the decoration at the end of the process. And I just want to shout out to all the science folks that, like, we have interesting ways of thinking, interesting ways of brainstorming, new ways of approaching topics. And so just an ask that maybe we be included in the design phase and the development phase and the collecting data, all those phases. So that's it.
Yeah, and that's true. That's true from the public art side too. Often, if you're designing a park or designing a plaza, our art team will kind of just get brought in. And I'm saying things that Tilly should be saying. And our public art manager, Stephanie Johnson, I know is on, and she's told me this a lot of times, like, yes, we want to be there when the engineers are talking about where the elevator is going to go. We want to be there. I'm like, okay. So, I mean, Rue's exactly right. Like, don't bring these folks in, at the end to create, decoration, but really integrate them in the whole process.
If you want a partner or, faculty that do, have them contact me, and I will make sure that that kind of matchmaking can absolutely happen. Tony Rourke put something in the chat that we're actually doing right now with the luminaries, that we're developing very template language for broader impacts for NSF grants, for people to be able to think about that. I would also say there was a number of innovation grant proposals that talked about that very thing of wanting to make those relationships stronger. And we have a variety of people on campus that are trying to do that from the outset. Jen Forby is a wonderful example of that. I would also remember too that a lot of our art faculty actually do have sustainability or environmental focus. So it's not like we talk about them just as their arts practice, but that's the thematic area that they're interested in studying. We just hired Erin Pierce in graphic design, who has that mutual like user experience with biology is like her training, and also getting to know how the artists think about sustainability. I've been doing a listening tour with all faculty starting at the beginning of August. And that's like one of my questions that we talk about, I think is a really interesting one. And I would just say we're starting a panel series for the School of the Arts that talks about some of these thematic areas that, we would love for you all to come, and we'll make sure that the word gets out about those.
Yeah, an example is Ted Appel is a sound artist, and he worked with scientists who were studying volcanoes And he was recording the sounds that the volcano makes at different points and then creating work from that. So that's an example of what we're talking about.
Oh, I love this. This is making me excited. I'm going to reach out to you, Amanda, after this. I have some ideas. All right. So one of the other questions, I think we probably have time for maybe one, maybe two, we'll see, was, can you share any insights regarding how art installments along public pathways encourage usership and pedestrian commuting?
Yeah, I think if you have a more interesting pedestrian pathway that they create landmarks that people know. I know that anecdotally people share with me that when they have a guest or a visitor in town, they'll take them around downtown specifically to show them the public art in our spaces. So I think it makes it more space specific and interesting.
I would also say we need more of that on campus, right? Like without a doubt. And you know, and Fonda can talk about this at length, but like we need the funding and resources to be able to do that. And normally, you know, these are not always people's priorities at the top of the mind. And so how can we think more about how to strategize to get access to those resources and to make that more prevalent and make it easier for those things to happen on campus?
Love that. Thank you. All right, other questions from the audience? Anyone else want to chime in here?
I want to just briefly thank everyone for attending today. I know that there's a lot of people in the audience who are engaged in the types of projects that we're talking about, and thank you for your partnership on these projects.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. So let's see. Okay, so Christina says, what can I do as a staff member in STEM to support you?
Make it STEAM.
Can you say what STEAM is for people who don't know?
STEAM is adding art in. And so I think that's identifying opportunities where you can bring artists in to explore those concepts through creative art making ways.
And Christina, I would love to meet with you to talk more about that as well, to like also hear what the needs are on your side, to think about how we can, you know, align those with resources and needs on our side to make a lot of those collaborations, happen.
I just had one more question that I think is a great one that came in. Can you share any insights for thinking about sustainability through the lens of our Indigenous communities in addressing the challenges climate change presents? Which is a great one.
Hey, yeah, Carson, you skipped out on that one on my end. Can you say that one more time?
Can you share any insights for thinking about sustainability through the lens of our Indigenous communities in addressing the challenges climate change presents?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to create better relationships with our Indigenous friends and neighbors, and then to listen. I mean, those are the two most important things, and we're trying to do that as best we can, and then to work to put their ideas and perspectives into our public spaces.
I think Tilly's been doing phenomenal work on that, like in her role as a cultural planner with the city of Boise. And, you know, I'm really grateful for that. I will also say that this is like a newer area for me. There was a group of us that went to Fort Hall, I think it was last week or the week before, to like kind of hear from them about the kinds of partnerships and research and issues that they would like for us to partner on. And they had this wonderful PhD student who did work on relationships between university and tribal partnerships. And one of the things that I thought was really important that this excellent PhD student had, it was the idea of equitable collaboration. And so I know for sure that that's something that's at the forefront of my mind, like as we move forward, particularly with the School of the Arts, of thinking about what does that look like and how can we do that equitable collaboration when thinking about art and sustainability in partnership together.
And I'll add one final thing. This is not going to surprise anybody who knows me, but you know, we tend to think, when we think about history in our valley in particular, we think about it starting in about 1850. And when you think about climate change, for instance, you really have to think about hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond that, to really understand the impacts that white settlement has had, European settlement has had on climate issues. And so the way to respect and include Indigenous communities in those conversations is to recognize the longevity of their occupation of this land and how long they have been on this land, and reframe your thinking honestly, as it relates to history and how that history impacts the current policy kind of debates that we're having right now.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, well, we're at the end of the hour, unfortunately. This was such a great conversation, and I just want to say thank you to Amanda, Tilly, Jennifer, and Rue for being here today, and for everyone listening and contributing to the chat. It was really, really great to have this conversation, and hopefully it will continue.
Thank you.
Thanks for including us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.